splendor of the King, clothed in majesty. Let all the earth rejoice, let all the earth rejoice. He wraps himself in light, and darkness tries to hide, and trembles at his voice, and trembles at his voice. How great is our God! Sing with me, how great is our God! And all will see how great is our God. And age to age he stands, and time is in his hands. Beginning and the end, beginning and the end. The Godhead three in one, Father, Spirit, Son, the Lion and the Lamb, the Lion and the Lamb. How great is our God! Sing with me, how great is our God! And all will see how great is our God. You're the name above all names. You are worthy of all praise. And my heart will sing, how great is our God. You're the name above all names. You are worthy of all praise. And my heart will sing, how great is our God. How great is our God! Sing with me, how great is our God! And all will see how great is our God. Oh, to see the dawn of the darkest day, Christ on the road to Calvary, tried by sinful men, torn and beaten men, nailed to a cross of wood. Yes, above the cross, Christ became sin for us, took the blame, bore the wrath we stand forgiven at the cross. Oh, to see the pain written on your face, bearing the awesome
On Thursday night, after the Last Supper, Jesus heads to the Garden of Gethsemane. There, Jesus spends some time in prayer. It says that his soul was very sorrowful, even unto death, and he asked his disciples to wait and pray. It says this in Matthew 26, verse 39. He went a little farther and fell on his face and prayed. He said, "O my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." Jesus comes back to the disciples and finds them sleeping. You can't watch 1 hour? Jesus then heads back to prayer. He comes back again to the disciples, and they have again fallen asleep. Jesus sees it this time and just lets them go sleep, and he heads back to pray some more. Jesus comes back a third time and wakes the disciples, and he says this in Matthew 26, verses 45 through 46. Then he came to his disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." This is when Judas brings with him a crowd with swords, and Judas gets close to Jesus and gives him a kiss. They try to take Jesus into custody. Peter grabs a sword and tries to protect Jesus like what he was supposed to do by praying and spending time beseeching God. This time he had a chance to redeem himself, grabs that sword, and cuts off an individual's ear. Jesus slows everyone down, heals the man's ear. Matthew 26, verses 57 through 59 say this, "And those who had laid hold of Jesus led him away to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and the elders were assembled. But Peter followed him at a distance to the high priest's court, and he went in and sat with the servants to see the end. Now the chief priests, the elders, and all the council sought false testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but found none." Jesus was first brought before Annas and Caiaphas. This is probably because the Sanhedrin needed to have some time to gather, because it was between 4 and 6 a.m. that this council gathered. During this time, Peter stays outside of where Jesus is held. An individual recognizes Peter. Peter denies it. This happens a total of 3 times. When the cock crows, Peter realized that Jesus was right. During this time, Jesus was moved to stand trial before the Sanhedrin. The trial was rigged. The accusers were paid to make up a story so that they could convict Jesus. All while Jesus is before the Sanhedrin, something happens to Judas. Judas realizes that Jesus is condemned, and he realizes what he has done. Matthew chapter 27, verses 4 through 10 say this, "I have sinned by betraying innocent blood," he says. And he said, "What is that to us? You see to it." Then he threw down the 30 pieces of silver in the temple and departed and went and hanged himself. The chief priest took the silver pieces and said, "It is not lawful to put them into the treasury because they are the price of blood." And they consulted together and brought with them the potter's field to bury strangers in. Therefore, that field has been called the field of blood to this day. Then was fulfilled what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet. saying, "And they took the 30 pieces of silver, the value of him who was priced, and whom they of the children of Israel priced, and gave them to the potter's field, as the Lord directed me." Then Jesus was brought before the Romans. It probably commenced around 6 a.m. that morning. There were 3 of them. The first before Pilate, then to Herod, then back to Pilate. This is where Pilate finds nothing wrong. Pilate offers a choice. "Do you want me to give you Barabbas or Jesus?" From the back of the crowd, people started chanting, "Barabbas." Matthew 27, verses 24 and following say this: "When Pilate saw that he could not prevail at all, but rather that a tumult was rising, he took water and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, 'I am innocent of the blood of this just person. You see to it.' And all the people answered and said, 'His blood is on us and on our children.' Then he released Barabbas to them. And when he had scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole garrison around him. And they stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. When they had twisted a crown of thorns, they put it on his head, a reed in his right hand. And they bowed the knee before him. They mocked him, saying, 'Hail, King of the Jews!' Then they spat on him and took the reed and struck him on the head. And when they had mocked him, they took the robe off him, put on his own clothes on him, and led him away to be crucified. Then Jesus was taken, mocked, whipped, stripped, all beyond recognition. When they had given him a crown of thorns, a purple robe, a scepter, they handed him a cross to carry. This was about 8:30 in the morning. This is when he traveled the Via Dolorosa to where he ultimately would be crucified on Golgotha at 9 a.m. People watched Jesus hanging on the cross between 2 thieves. The guards bartered over Jesus' clothes. Women crying. Conversation happens between the thieves and Jesus. Jesus cries out those 7 phrases. Noon, darkness falls over all the land. Torches are lit. Fires are made. For several more hours, they waited and they watched. Then, at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the crowd hears, "It is finished." Jesus commits his spirit into God's hands and dies. Matthew 27, verses 51 through 54 say this: "Then behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth quaked. The rocks were split. The graves were opened up, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the graves after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. So when the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and the things that had happened, they feared greatly, saying, 'Truly, this is the Son of God.'" The temple veil torn in two. Jesus dies for the sins of all mankind. Matthew 27, verse 57 says this: Now when the evening had come, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who himself had become a disciple of Jesus. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate commanded the body to be given to him. When Joseph had taken the body, he wrapped it in clean linen cloth, and he laid it in his new tomb, which he had hewed out of the rock. And he rolled a large stone against the door of the tomb and departed. And Mary Magdalene was there, and the other Mary, sitting opposite the tomb. Joseph got permission to bury Jesus in his grave. He travels to Golgotha, wraps the body in a clean cloth, places the body of Jesus into this tomb before sunset, and they rolled a stone in front of the tomb.